The morning after the meeting brought uncertainty to the Crystal Valley. Ashendra woke in her dwelling, a structure carved from living crystal that had grown over centuries into the shape of a natural cave. Her two dragons still slept outside, their bodies intertwined around the protective stones of her home. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the purple landscape. Victoria was already awake. The human woman stood at the edge of the crystal cliff, looking out over the vast expanse of Meridian Prime. She had spent the entire night thinking about what she had witnessed, about the connection between Ashendra and the dragons, about the responsibility she was now taking on by joining them. Her soldiers remained in the 5 ships above, confused and waiting for orders that Victoria had not yet sent. When Ashendra emerged from her dwelling, she found Victoria standing exactly where she had been when they parted the night before. The elf woman could sense the human's emotions through the air itself. Victoria was afraid, but not of the dragons. She was afraid of failing in her mission to protect them. Ashendra approached slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the crystal surface. This was one of the gifts of her elf heritage. She could move through the world almost like a shadow, almost like she was not truly part of the physical realm. "Victoria?" Ashendra spoke, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You must understand what you have chosen. To protect the dragons is not an easy task. Many will come for them. Many will try to capture them or kill them for profit. Are you prepared for this burden?" Victoria turned to face the elf woman. In the morning light, her dark skin seemed to glow with a strength that came from deep within her soul. She nodded slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and certain. "I have been hunting my entire life," Victoria said. "I was raised by my father to track creatures and bring them to those who would pay for them. For many years, I did exactly as I was told. I captured rare animals and sent them to wealthy collectors across a dozen star systems. I thought I was doing good work. I thought I was serving a purpose." Ashendra listened without interrupting. She had learned over her long years that sometimes humans needed to speak their truth aloud before they could truly move forward. "Then 5 years ago, I was assigned to hunt dragons," Victoria continued. "I was given a location on a distant moon where an elf woman and 2 ancient dragons were said to be hiding. I prepared my weapons and my team, and we set out to complete the mission. But something went wrong with our navigation system. We landed on the wrong moon instead." Victoria paused, and Ashendra could see pain flickering behind the human's eyes. The elf woman placed her hand on Victoria's shoulder, offering comfort without words. "We discovered a dragon there," Victoria said quietly. "It was young, maybe only 2 centuries old. It had been captured by other hunters and put in a cage. The dragon was dying because they were feeding it the wrong foods, because they were trying to extract its scales while it was still alive. My sister Laura could not bear to watch it suffer. She opened the cage to set it free. The dragon killed her," Victoria said. "It was defending itself, lashing out in pain and fear. But my father blamed me. He said that if I had been more careful, if I had not made mistakes, Laura would still be alive. For 5 years, I have searched the galaxy trying to find a way to make it right. I learned that the only way to stop the hunting was to find the source, to find the last place where dragons still lived freely and protected. And that is how I found you." Ashendra felt deep sadness emanate from Victoria's heart. This human woman had been carrying guilt for so long, thinking that protecting the dragons would somehow bring balance to her sister's death. It was a heavy burden to place on oneself. "Victoria," Ashendra said gently, "your sister's death was not your fault. The dragon was a creature fighting for its survival. You cannot blame yourself for nature following its course. But what you can do now is honor her memory, by ensuring that no more dragons suffer the way that young dragons suffered. This is a true way to make peace with your past." Victoria wiped tears from her cheeks. She had not cried in 5 years, not since the day her sister died. The emotions that she had locked away deep inside her were finally being released, flowing out like a river that had been dammed up for far too long. "I want to help you," Victoria said. "I want to learn from you. I want to understand the dragons the way you do. Tell me what I need to know." Ashendra and Victoria spent the entire day together. The elf woman showed the human woman how to approach the dragons with respect, how to listen to their minds through the mental connection that bonded them together. Zephyr was easier to communicate with. The blue dragon was curious about the human and wanted to understand her better. Crimson was more cautious. But eventually the red dragon allowed Victoria to touch his scales and to feel the warmth of the ancient magic that lived inside him. By the time the sun began to set, Victoria had experienced something she had never imagined was possible. She could feel the edges of the dragon's thoughts in her own mind. It was not a complete connection like Ashendra had with them, but it was enough. She could sense their hunger, their contentment, their deep wisdom. She could understand why Ashendra had devoted her entire life to protecting them. That night, Victoria made a decision. She sent a message to her soldiers in the ships above. She told them that the mission had changed, that they would no longer be capturing the dragons. Instead, they would be staying on Meridian Prime to serve as guardians and protectors. Some of the soldiers disagreed with this order. They wanted to return home and report to their superiors. Victoria let them leave, and 4 of the 5 ships departed into the darkness of space. Only one ship remained, captained by a tough human named Linda, who had served under Victoria for many years. Linda was loyal and she trusted Victoria's judgment. She understood that something important had happened on this remote planet, something that would change the course of history. As the 4 ships disappeared into the stars, Ashendra stood beside Victoria on the crystal cliff. The elf woman could see that this human had finally found her true purpose. Victoria would no longer be a hunter. She would be a guardian just like Ashendra. Together, they would protect the last dragons of the galaxy and ensure that they lived freely and safely for as long as the stars continued to shine in the sky. The dragons sensed this shift as well. Zephyr and Crimson approached Victoria and rubbed their massive heads against her body, a sign of acceptance and friendship. The scales on their skin glowed softly in the darkness, creating patterns of light that danced across the crystal landscape. Ashendra smiled. For 300 years she had carried this burden alone. Now finally she had found an ally. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them in the vast and dangerous galaxy, and the dragons would no longer have to hide. They would finally be free to exist in the open, protected not just by an elf's ancient magic, but by the determination of a human woman who had learned the true meaning of redemption. 3 weeks had passed since Victoria made her decision to stay on Meridian Prime. The Crystal Valley had transformed into a small base of operations. The ship that remained above had been reprogrammed to serve as a communication hub and storage facility. Linda had selected 5 volunteers from her crew to work on the ground, helping Victoria and Ashendra establish a proper sanctuary for the dragons. The team consisted of engineers and scientists who understood how to work with advanced technology. They began installing energy barriers around the valley that would protect the dragons from detection by hostile forces. The barriers were invisible to most sensors, designed specifically to hide the unique genetic signatures that made the dragons so valuable to hunters and collectors across the galaxy. Ashendra taught Victoria everything she knew about dragon care. The elf woman's knowledge was vast and ancient. She understood the dietary needs of dragons, how to recognize when they were ill, how to help them maintain their scales and claws. She knew the rituals that strengthened the bond between dragon and guardian. She shared stories of her life before, of the great civilizations that had once revered the dragons as holy creatures worthy of worship and protection. Victoria listened to these stories with intense focus. She began to understand that by protecting the dragons, she was preserving more than just 2 living creatures. She was preserving a connection to the universe's ancient history, to a time when magic and technology existed in perfect balance. But not everything was peaceful. In the 4th week, the communication system on the ship received a distress signal from another human vessel. The signal came from a mining colony on the outer edge of the system, a facility that was normally quiet and routine. Now it was under attack. Linda brought the news to Ashendra and Victoria. The 2 women gathered in the command center, a circular room lined with holographic displays that showed the status of the entire region. The mining colony was 2 light years away, but the human vessel in distress would reach them in less than 30 hours if they traveled at maximum speed. "We need to help them," Victoria said immediately. "We cannot ignore the suffering of others even if we are focused on protecting the dragons." But Ashendra hesitated. She had learned through centuries of experience that helping sometimes led to complications. If Victoria and her soldiers went to the mining colony, they might draw attention to Meridian Prime. Hunters and other military forces might track them back to this hidden location. "I understand your concern," Victoria said, reading the worry on Ashendra's face. But if we turn away from those who need us, what does that make us? We are fighting to protect life and freedom. If we only care about dragons and not about humans, then we are no better than the hunters we are trying to stop. Ashendra pondered this wisdom. The human woman was right. True protection meant caring about all life, not just the creatures one had devoted oneself to guarding. Take the ship, Ashendra said finally. But go carefully. Leave enough soldiers here to maintain the barriers and keep the dragons safe. And when you return, be certain you are not followed. Victoria assembled a team of 12 soldiers and prepared to depart. Before she left, she spent time with the dragons, touching their scales and trying to communicate her intentions through the mental link. The dragons understood that Victoria was leaving, but that she would return. Ashendra walked with Victoria to the landing platform where the ship waited. The elf woman placed her hand on Victoria's shoulder in a gesture of trust and friendship. Be safe, Ashendra said. The galaxy is darker than you might expect. There are forces at work that care nothing for life or freedom. They only care for power and control. I know, Victoria replied. I have spent most of my life working for such forces, but I am choosing a different path now. I am choosing to be better than my past. I will protect these people, and I will return safely. The ship launched into the sky, leaving trails of blue fire as it accelerated away from Meridian Prime. Ashendra watched until it disappeared into the darkness of space. She had felt fear in that moment, a fear that was foreign to her after living for so many centuries. She was afraid of losing Victoria, afraid that this human woman who had just begun to understand the true purpose of protection would be taken away. It was a strange feeling, and it took Ashendra some time to recognize it for what it was. She was afraid because Victoria had become important to her. In just a few weeks, the elf woman had formed a genuine connection with this human, a connection that went beyond the bond she shared with the dragons. It was a connection between two souls who had chosen to dedicate their lives to protecting something greater than themselves. Meanwhile, Victoria and her team approached the mining colony at high speed. When they arrived, they found the colony under siege by a group of raiders known as the Vex. The Vex were mercenaries who traveled from system to system, taking what they wanted through force and violence. The mining colony's defenses were failing. The raiders had superior firepower and had already breached the outer walls. Civilians were being gathered in detention chambers, presumably to be sold into slavery on distant worlds. Victoria's ship descended with weapons blazing. Energy cannons erupted from the hull, striking the raiders' vessels and forcing them to break their attack pattern. The soldiers under Victoria's command engaged in fierce combat with the Vex forces. The battle lasted nearly 2 hours. Victoria herself entered the mining colony through a breach in the wall, leading her soldiers through corridors filled with smoke and danger. She fought with a skill born from years of training and experience. She moved with purpose and determination, protecting the civilians and driving back the raiders. When the final Vex ship was destroyed and the last raiders either killed or captured, Victoria stood among the colonists with weapons still smoking in her hands. The civilians looked at her with gratitude and awe. She had arrived like a guardian angel, descending from the sky to save them from certain death or slavery. Victoria organized the evacuation, using the ship's medical facilities to tend to the wounded. She sent a message to the colony's administrators, informing them of what had happened and offering to assist with repairs and restoration. As the ship prepared to leave the mining colony and return to Meridian Prime, Victoria reflected on the battle and on what she had done. She had used violence, yes, but she had used it in defense of innocent lives. This was different from her life as a hunter, where she had pursued creatures for profit and personal gain. Now she was using her skills and her power to protect those who could not protect themselves. The journey back to Meridian Prime took slightly longer than expected. Victoria had taken a careful, winding route through space to ensure that no hostile forces were following her. When her ship finally emerged into the Meridian system, she felt relief wash over her. But as the ship descended toward the Crystal Valley, Victoria received an urgent message from Linda. The barriers protecting the dragons had been attacked. Someone had discovered their location, and hunters were closing in on Meridian Prime. Ashendra and the dragons were in danger, and they needed help immediately. Victoria ordered the ship to increase speed. She did not know how much time they had left, but she knew that she could not allow anything to happen to the creatures she had sworn to protect. The ship accelerated toward the planet, racing against time itself. Ashendra was in the crystalline gardens tending to the healing plants when she felt the danger. A sudden sharp pain echoed through her mind, transmitted directly from Zephyr. The blue dragon was frightened and angry. Enemies had breached the outer barriers of the sanctuary. The elf woman ran toward the cliffs, moving with the speed that only centuries of survival had taught her. When she arrived at the highest point overlooking the valley, she saw them. 7 large warships descended through the atmosphere, their hulls scarred and dented from countless battles. They belonged to the Syndicate, an organization of hunters and collectors who had been searching for the dragons for more than a decade. Crimson released a roar so powerful that it shattered nearby crystal formations, sending fragments tumbling down the mountainside. Zephyr unleashed a blast of blue fire into the sky, striking one of the approaching ships and causing it to veer sharply away from its intended course. But the dragon's attacks were not enough. The warships had armor plating specifically designed to withstand dragon fire. The weapon systems on the ships began charging, preparing to assault the valley with devastating firepower. Ashendra closed her eyes and opened her mind completely to the dragons. She flooded their consciousness with everything she felt, everything she knew about the situation and about their options. Zephyr and Crimson understood that they needed to leave the valley immediately. This sanctuary, which had been their home for decades, could not protect them from this onslaught. "Follow me," Ashendra commanded through the mental link. "We must retreat to the deep caverns beneath the crystal mountains. The stone will protect us from their weapons." The dragons obeyed without question. Zephyr and Crimson followed their guardian deeper into the valley, toward a passage that led into the earth itself. Ashendra had discovered this network of caverns when she first arrived on Meridian Prime. The tunnels were large enough to accommodate dragons, and they were reinforced with ancient crystal formations that were harder than any metal known to human technology. As they descended into the darkness, Ashendra heard the first explosions above. The Syndicate warships were beginning their assault on the valley. The beautiful crystal landscape that had been home to Ashendra and the dragons for so many years was being destroyed in a matter of minutes. Pain filled the elf woman's heart. She had built this sanctuary with her own hands over the course of decades. She had nurtured it and protected it, creating a haven where the dragons could live in peace. Now it was being torn apart by forces that cared nothing for beauty or life or freedom. But Ashendra could not afford to dwell on this loss. She had to focus on survival and protection. She led the dragons deeper into the caverns, into passages that became narrower and more treacherous with each turn. The walls of the tunnel began to glow with the internal light of the crystal formations, illuminating their path forward. They reached a vast chamber deep within the mountain, a space so large that even the dragons could move freely without touching the walls or ceiling. This was the heart of the Crystal Mountain, a place of ancient power that predated human civilization by millions of years. Ashendra placed her hands on the walls of the chamber and began to chant in the old language, the language of creation and power that few beings in the galaxy still knew. As she spoke, the crystal walls began to respond to her voice, glowing brighter and brighter until the entire chamber was filled with blinding light. The light formed barriers, shields of pure crystalline energy that sealed the chamber from the outside world. No weapon, no matter how advanced, could penetrate these shields. Ashendra had created a fortress within the earth itself, a place where the dragons would be truly safe. Zephyr and Crimson rested in the center of the chamber, their bodies still trembling from the stress of the rapid descent and the violence above. Ashendra moved among them, touching their scales and offering comfort through the mental connection they shared. High above, in the command center of the Syndicate's flagship, the hunters were confused and frustrated. Their weapons continued to strike the valley, destroying the crystal structures and mining the landscape for valuable materials, but they could find no sign of the dragons. It was as if the creatures had simply vanished into thin air. In fact, one of the Syndicate commanders suspected what had actually happened. His name was Gerard, and he had hunted dragons for 30 years. He had studied elf magic extensively and understood that the creatures might have used ancient spells to hide themselves. "They are gone," Gerard told the other commanders. "The elf woman has used magic to conceal them. We are wasting time and ammunition on an empty valley." The other commanders were not willing to give up. They continued the assault for another hour, destroying more and more of the landscape but finding nothing of value. Eventually, they were forced to accept Gerard's assessment. The dragons had escaped. As the warships began to withdraw from Meridian Prime, a new ship emerged from hyperspace. It was Victoria's vessel traveling at maximum speed. When Victoria saw the Syndicate warships leaving the planet, she understood what had happened. "Linda, lock weapons on those ships immediately," Victoria commanded. "These are the hunters who have been pursuing the dragons. We will not let them leave without consequences." The battle was fierce but brief. Victoria's single ship could not match the firepower of the Syndicate's multiple warships, but Victoria had advantages that the hunters did not possess. She had skill, determination, and a crew that was absolutely loyal to her mission. She had something to fight for beyond profit and power. Victoria's ship struck the nearest Syndicate vessel with a devastating barrage of energy weapons. The hunters were forced to return fire, but they were unprepared for such fierce resistance. They had expected to find dragons, not a military vessel willing to challenge them directly. As the battle raged above the planet, Ashendra sensed Victoria's presence. The elf woman could feel the humans' determination and courage, even through the barriers that separated her from the world above. She knew that Victoria had returned, that her friend had survived the mission to save the mining colony. "Hold on," Ashendra whispered to the dragons. "Victoria's here. She is fighting for us. Soon we will return to the sky and reclaim what was taken from us." The battle lasted nearly 30 minutes. In the end, the Syndicate warships were forced to retreat. They had suffered too much damage and had lost too many fighters to continue the engagement. The hunters left the Meridian system with nothing to show for their attack but empty cargo holds and the bitter taste of defeat. Victoria's ship descended toward the valley and received a strong signal from the deep caverns. Ashendra was alive, and she was calling out to Victoria through the mental connection they had begun to establish. "Come." Ashendra's voice resonated in Victoria's mind. "We are safe below. The Crystal Mountain has protected us. Your arrival has driven the hunters away. Now we must rebuild what was lost and prepare for greater challenges ahead." Victoria led a team of engineers and soldiers down into the crystal caverns beneath Meridian Prime. They carried equipment and supplies, determined to support Ashendra and the dragons in whatever way they could. The descent took nearly 2 hours, navigating through narrow passages and around dangerous crystal formations that jutted from the walls and floors. When they reached the main chamber, Victoria was stunned by the sight before her. The space was enormous, larger than any structure she had ever seen. The walls glowed with an ethereal blue light, and in the center of the chamber, Zephyr and Crimson rested peacefully against each other. Ashendra stood beside them, looking exhausted but resolute. Victoria rushed to the elf woman and embraced her. For a moment, all the tension and fear that Victoria had been carrying since receiving the distress message released itself. She had been afraid that she would arrive too late, that she would find only destruction and loss, but Ashendra was alive, and the dragons were safe. "We were attacked by a hunting organization known as the Syndicate," Ashendra explained once Victoria had composed herself. "They somehow discovered our location, but the Crystal Mountain protected us. The old magic is strong in this place. The hunters could not find us." Victoria looked around the chamber with growing understanding. This was not just a hiding place. This was a repository of ancient power, a sanctuary that had been created long before humans had even developed space travel. It was a reminder that there were forces in the universe that were far older and far more powerful than any technological weapon. "How long can we stay here?" Ashendra asked. "Can you and your soldiers help us fortify this location further?" "Of course," Victoria said without hesitation. "We will make this chamber impregnable. No hunter will ever be able to reach the dragons while they are protected here." Over the next several days, Victoria and her team worked alongside Ashendra to strengthen the sanctuary. They installed advanced security systems that would detect any approach through the crystal tunnels. They established communication arrays that would allow Ashendra to monitor the galaxy above and warn them of any future threats. They created storage facilities for food and water, ensuring that the dragons could survive in the caverns for as long as necessary. As the work progressed, Ashendra began to teach Victoria more about the history of the dragons and about the ancient magic that permeated Meridian Prime. The elf woman shared stories that spanned centuries, tales of civilizations that had risen and fallen, of wars fought and peace achieved through understanding. "You ask why the dragons are so important to me," Ashendra said as they worked together to position crystalline sensors around the chamber. "It is not just because they are rare or powerful. It is because they represent a connection to something greater than ourselves. Dragons are beings of pure magic, creatures that exist between the physical and spiritual worlds. When we protect the dragons, we are protecting that connection. Without them, the universe becomes a place of only science and technology, a place where wonder and mystery are replaced by calculation and control." Victoria listened intently. She had spent her life hunting creatures for profit, viewing them as resources to be exploited. But through her connection with Ashendra and the dragons, she was learning that there was far more to existence than simple survival or accumulation of wealth. "I understand now why my sister died," Victoria said quietly. "Laura saw the young dragon not as a creature to be caged or used, but as a living being worthy of freedom. She tried to save it and it defended itself, but she was not wrong in her attempt. She was trying to protect life, and that is noble even if it cost her everything." Ashendra placed her hand on Victoria's heart. She could feel the pain that had been locked inside this human woman for so long, finally beginning to transform into something else. The guilt was not disappearing, but it was becoming a source of strength rather than weakness. "Your sister would be proud of you," Ashendra said. "You are honoring her memory by choosing to protect instead of hunt, by choosing to defend instead of capture. This is the greatest tribute you could offer to her spirit." 2 weeks after the attack, Linda sent a message from the ship above. The Syndicate warships had been traced back to their home base on a station in a distant system. More importantly, the message contained information about other human and alien forces that were searching for the dragons. The hunters were not organized into a single group, but rather were competing factions, each seeking to capture the creatures for their own purposes. "This is worse than I thought," Victoria said as she read the report. "The hunters will keep coming. As long as the dragons exist, there will be forces seeking to capture or destroy them. We cannot hide down here forever." Ashendra nodded slowly. She had known this truth for a long time. Hiding was only a temporary solution. Eventually, they would have to face the broader galaxy and deal with the forces that threatened the dragon's survival. "Then we must find a way to protect them in plain sight," Ashendra said. "We must go to the Council of Star Systems and petition for the dragons to be recognized as sentient beings, worthy of protection under galactic law. If we can achieve this, then hunting the dragons would be considered a crime, and we would have legal authority to defend them." This was an ambitious plan, and Victoria understood the dangers involved. The Council of Star Systems was politically complex, filled with representatives who had various interests and agendas. Convincing them to protect the dragons would require not just evidence and persuasion, but also powerful allies. "But we must try," Victoria said. "We must take the risk, because if we do not, if we simply accept that the dragons must remain hidden forever, then the hunters have already won. They have already taken away the dragon's freedom." Over the next month, Ashendra and Victoria prepared for their journey to the council. They gathered evidence of the dragon's intelligence and awareness. Zephyr and Crimson demonstrated their ability to communicate through the mental links, to understand complex ideas and emotions, to make choices and decisions about their own futures. Linda coordinated with other human military vessels that had allied with Victoria during her years of service. These ships agreed to provide escort and protection for Ashendra's journey to the Council of Star Systems. The dragons were prepared for the journey as well. Special transport containers were constructed that would keep them comfortable and safe during travel through hyperspace. Ashendra ensured that the bonds between herself and the dragons were strengthened, knowing that the separation from Meridian Prime would be difficult for them. On the day of departure, Ashendra stood one last time in the crystal chamber beneath the mountain. She placed her hand on the walls and whispered a goodbye to the place that had been her home for so long. Then she turned away, ready to face the galaxy and all the challenges that awaited her and the dragons. Victoria stood beside her, shoulders squared and determination burning in her eyes. Together, they walked toward the ascending passages that would lead them back to the surface and to the waiting ships. Together, they would journey to the Council of Star Systems, carrying with them the hopes and futures of the last dragons of the galaxy. And together they would fight to ensure that these magnificent creatures would be free to live and thrive for generations to come. The journey to the Council of Star Systems took 3 weeks of travel through hyperspace. Ashendra spent most of that time in the transport containers with Zephyr and Crimson, maintaining the mental connection and keeping them calm during the stresses of space travel. The dragons had never experienced hyperspace before, and the sensation was overwhelming for them at first. Victoria remained on the command bridge of the lead ship, coordinating with the other vessels in their small fleet. She was nervous about what awaited them at the council, knowing that many representatives would be skeptical of her claims about the dragons, but she had confidence in Ashendra and in the truth of what they were attempting to accomplish. When the fleet finally emerged from hyperspace near the council station, Victoria was struck by the sheer scale of the installation. The station was massive, a structure that had been built over hundreds of years by countless species and civilizations. It orbited a distant star, serving as a meeting place where delegates from thousands of different worlds gathered to discuss matters of galactic importance. The docking procedure was complex and required several hours of negotiations with station authority, but eventually Victoria was able to secure docking privileges and begin the process of disembarking with Ashendra and the dragons. Before they left the ship, Victoria pulled Ashendra aside for a private conversation. Many of the council representatives are motivated by profit and power, Victoria warned. They will argue that the dragons should be examined and studied, that their genetic material is too valuable to simply leave in the wild. We will face opposition from multiple factions. I understand, Ashendra replied calmly, but I have lived for a very long time. I have learned that truth, when spoken with clarity and conviction, has power. Even in a place filled with politics and self-interest, truth can sometimes find its way. They transported Zephyr and Crimson in specialized containment fields that kept the dragons protected while still allowing them to move around freely. The sight of the two ancient creatures attracted immediate attention as they made their way through the station's corridors. Species from hundreds of different worlds stopped to stare. Most had never seen a dragon before. Many did not even believe that dragons truly existed. The presentation chamber was a vast amphitheater, designed to accommodate delegates from diverse species and body types. Representatives from insectoid civilizations occupied one section, while humanoid beings filled another. Aquatic species were accommodated in specially designed environments, and energy beings hovered in specially shielded areas. Ashendra stood in the center of the chamber with the dragons visible in the containment fields beside her. Victoria stood to one side, monitoring the reactions of the delegates and preparing responses to the questions that would surely come. Council members, Ashendra began, her voice carrying through the amphitheater and being translated into hundreds of different languages by the sophisticated translation systems. I have come before you today to ask for your protection. These dragons before you are not animals to be hunted or commodities to be bought and sold. They are sentient beings with the capacity to think, to feel, and to make decisions about their own lives. They deserve the same protections and considerations that you grant to sapient species throughout the galaxy. A delegate from a wealthy commercial power immediately stood to challenge her. This being was humanoid in appearance, but with crystalline skin that glinted under the chamber lights. You claim these creatures are sentient, the delegate said. But where is your proof? We have evidence from multiple scientific studies that dragons are intelligent animals, nothing more. To grant them legal protection as sentient beings would be to disrupt the economy of entire star systems. Hunters and collectors have built their livelihoods around the trade in dragon parts and genetics. Ashendra remained calm. Let me demonstrate, she said, addressing the council. She reached out with her mind toward Zephyr and Crimson, connecting with them through the bonds they had formed over centuries together. The dragon's eyes began to glow with a gentle blue light, and suddenly the entire chamber could hear the dragon's thoughts. Zephyr spoke first, his mind voice resonating through every being in the chamber. I am 3,742 years old. I have loved freely and feared for my survival. I have raised offspring and mourned those who were taken from me. I have the capacity to choose my own path, and I choose to remain free. Crimson's voice followed, deeper and more powerful. We are not resources for you to exploit. We are conscious, aware, and capable of determining our own destinies. We ask not for your approval or your understanding. We ask for your respect and for your law to acknowledge our right to exist without persecution." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, arguing about the significance of what they had just witnessed. Some were convinced immediately of the dragon's sentience. Others remained skeptical, arguing that the demonstration could be some form of technological manipulation. Victoria stepped forward and activated a massive holographic display that covered one entire wall of the chamber. The images showed footage of the mining colony that Victoria had rescued, showing civilians being saved from slavery and destruction. It showed the Syndicate warships attacking Meridian Prime, demonstrating the violence that hunters were willing to commit in pursuit of the dragons. "This is what freedom looks like when there is no legal protection for the hunted," Victoria said. "Entire civilizations of beings like these dragons are destroyed every year because there is profit in their destruction. We stand at a crossroads. We can choose to expand our circle of protection, to extend legal rights to sapient beings regardless of their physical form. Or we can choose to continue a system where power and profit determine whose lives have value." The debate continued for hours. More questions were asked. More evidence was presented. Scientists examined the dragons and confirmed that their brain structures showed evidence of complex thought and self-awareness. Cultural representatives from ancient civilizations testified about the historical significance of dragons in their own societies. Eventually, a vote was called. The measure proposed was simple. Dragons would be recognized as sapient beings worthy of legal protection under galactic law. Hunting, capturing, or harming dragons would be classified as a crime. Violators would face prosecution by the Council and imprisonment in accordance with the severity of their offenses. The vote passed by a significant margin. Not all representatives agreed, but the majority understood the importance of what was being decided. A new protection was being extended. A new recognition that sentience came in many forms and deserved protection regardless. Ashendra and Victoria stood together as the council made its decision official. In that moment, the course of history shifted. The dragons were no longer hunted creatures. They were citizens of the galactic community, with rights and protections that would be enforced by the most powerful coalition of forces in the known universe. After the formal proceedings concluded, a representative named Margaret approached Ashendra and Victoria. Margaret was an older human woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She had been on the council for 15 years and was known as someone who cared deeply about the protection of vulnerable beings. "What you have accomplished today is significant," Margaret said, "but you must understand that this protection will require ongoing vigilance. There will be those who will try to circumvent the law, who will continue to hunt the dragons in secret." "We know," Ashendra replied, "but now we have the law on our side, and we have allies. Together we can create a galaxy where the dragons can truly be free." Over the following months, Ashendra, Victoria, and the dragons became symbols of a movement toward greater rights and protections for all sentient beings. They traveled throughout the galaxy, speaking to various civilizations and sharing their story. More species came forward requesting legal recognition and protection. The framework that had been created to protect the dragons was expanded and strengthened to protect many other beings as well. Zephyr and Crimson eventually returned to Meridian Prime, but they returned as representatives of a larger cause. They were no longer hiding creatures, but ambassadors for all those who had been hunted and exploited. Young dragons were born to them. The first generation of dragons that would grow up in a galaxy where their species had legal standing and protection. Ashendra finally found the peace that she had been seeking for 300 years. She was no longer alone in her mission. She had found allies, friends, and companions who shared her vision of a more just and compassionate universe. Victoria discovered her true purpose. She was no longer a hunter of creatures, but a protector of the vulnerable, and a voice for those who had been silenced. She continued to serve on the council, working tirelessly to ensure that laws remained in place to protect dragons and all other sentient beings. And as the galaxy moved forward into a new era, the dragons flew free under open skies, their scales shimmering in the light of distant stars, their wings carrying them toward futures filled with hope and possibility.